The next piece is a chapter from later in my life when I'm an adult, and it's from the second section of the book. It's called "What Can I Say?" And it's not a rhetorical question. The first person I told about my breast cancer diagnosis was my neighbor Leslie. I wasn't prepared for her level of concern, couched as it was in numerous questions. Does it run in your family? Which turns out to be everybody's first question. How did you find it? How big? Did the pathology report come back yet? What about the nodes? I couldn't decide what I wanted to answer and what I didn't. Only that I wished I'd thought twice about telling anyone at all. My ambivalence only grew stronger a few days later, when I bumped into Leslie's visiting sister and brother-in-law in the elevator. I was fine when her sister just asked, "How are you doing?" And I said, "Okay." But after she got off the elevator and walked left toward Leslie's apartment, I saw her reflection in the hallway mirror, saw her look at her husband with a raised left eyebrow, then quickly nod her head back in my direction before looking at him again, as if to say she's the one with the cancer. I felt an all too familiar feeling from childhood. Isolated, different, vulnerable, a loser. I realized I needed to feel in control of the information about me, especially once chemo would start. The thought of neighbors whispering behind my back, "Is it just me, or is Mindy not looking so good?" somehow started feeling almost as bad as the idea of chemo itself. So I kept talking. The next person I told was my older neighbor in 12J. "Sonia," I started with tears in my eyes, "I have breast cancer." Without missing a beat, she said, "So who doesn't?" And I knew I'd made the right choice. But that was only my first brush with the feeling of telling people. All this happened the summer of 2006. My family had had a great triumph earlier that year when Isaac got into, my younger son Isaac, got into a terrific school for kindergarten, our first choice of all the schools we'd seen. Such was the craziness of the school application process that when I first learned I had breast cancer in June, one of my earliest complaints was that if I had to have cancer, why couldn't it at least have been diagnosed sooner? So we could have used it in the application essays to guilt the admissions departments, or at least highlight Isaac's brave demeanor. If you could call brave a consciousness that couldn't differentiate between multiple malignant tumors and not getting the Tootsie Pop you wanted. The school directory alone was intimidating enough, dotted with names of celebrities and moguls and fancy addresses on the Upper East Side. As a West Sider without a summer home, I felt like their idea of diversity. But I sensed Isaac would be able to fit in because of the naturally bubbly personality that still puzzles his parents, the kind of people who fight over who has to pay the Chinese food delivery guy, thereby making contact with an actual human. "You pay him." "No, I'm the one who phoned in the order. You pay him." He was going to start school the day after Labor Day, the same week I was slated to start chemotherapy. What was I going to do about what, if anything, to tell his classmates' parents? How could I keep it a secret without making Isaac feel isolated by it? On the other hand, I didn't want to be known for the next 13 years as the cancer chick. I kept thinking of that old pantyhose commercial from my childhood, featuring a little girl at the zoo yelling in a high-pitched squeal, "Mommy, Mommy, that lady's legs look just like the elephant," because her hose was bunched up at her ankles. Just imagine what these little 5-year-olds would be saying about my ever-disappearing hair. I wouldn't be completely bald, but would lose up to 3/4 of my hair, and had no way of knowing how the rest of me would look either. But then what to say, whom to say it to, how to say it, without once again feeling little and pathetic. At least it was still August, and I'd have some time before school started to figure it out. By this point, I'd had a bilateral mastectomy and the beginning of my reconstruction. Empty plastic balloons, called expanders, replaced what used to be sizable D cups, or as my husband used to refer to them, my magnificent rack. Over the months, they would gradually be filled with salt water until they were the size I wanted them to be. Then after 4 months of chemotherapy were finished poisoning my body and some extra time for healing, they'd be replaced with permanent implants. The expanders were very uncomfortable and felt like I was wearing a steel bra over a concrete chest. But I used the time to figure out what size breasts I wanted. At only 4'11", I looked like 75% of my body was made out of breast material. And I jumped at the chance to lighten my load. My rack's alleged magnificence notwithstanding. It was the first time I started to look at women the same way I'd seen some men look at me, unapologetically eyeing their breasts and caring nothing for the person attached. Too perky for my age. No, too big. No, too tomboyish. It became a joke. With chemotherapy to look forward to, one looks for jokes whenever one can find them. It just so happened one day in August, I found the perfect breasts. That month, Isaac went to soccer camp in Riverside Park. One of the mothers was a beautiful redhead named Leah, whose son Jack was in Isaac's soccer group. As soon as I saw her in the bleachers near the field, I knew those were the tits for me. But it just so happened that Jack was going to attend Isaac's school also. And I immediately started to worry again about the whole telling or not telling business. And both Leah and her husband seemed like the heart of glamour, despite the fact that they were in t-shirts and shorts whenever I saw them. She was a very successful businesswoman and her husband a well-known attorney. I already felt little compared to them. Watching the kids from the bleachers one morning, I ventured out enough to tell her I recognized her from a school event for incoming students that previous spring. She didn't seem to recognize me, but smiled a friendly smile, and we chatted comfortably about school, soccer, and whatever. All the while, I obsessed internally about what, if anything, to tell her and the other parents about the cancer. One day, Jack was having a group of friends over at their apartment after soccer camp, and he invited Isaac along. We all got on the bus toward their apartment. Leah sat in the very back with Jack and the rest of the boys, while I sat with Isaac in the middle of the bus because there's no more room in the back. I told him I was feeling very tired, as it had been only a couple of weeks since my mastectomy. He could stay at Jack's home as long as he wanted, but only if I could drop him off. If he needed me to stay the whole time, which was understandable because it was a new environment for him, then he'd have to stay for only a short while. Isaac betrayed none of the obsessive angst I associated with making decisions. He immediately stood up in the middle of the bus, faced the back, and started to yell. "Hey, Jack! What? I'm going to have to leave our play date early!" Wow, I was so impressed with his absolute lack of ambivalence. Then he continued, "Because my mom has breast cancer!" It's funny now. I tried to pretend for the rest of the ride that my son hadn't just blurted out to the entire bus the most personal and painful detail of my life at the time. I said nothing about it even as we walked off the bus and into Jack's apartment, which was grand indeed, with a gorgeous view of a gleaming Hudson River. But standing in Leah's kitchen, beautifully renovated in wood and stone, I couldn't bear the feeling that my secret had been taken away from me, and I sheepishly whispered to her, "You didn't happen to hear the second half of what Isaac yelled out on the bus, did you?" I had no idea what I would have said next if she'd said that no, she hadn't heard it. "Yep," she nodded. Before I could say anything, not because she spoke so quickly, but because it was taking me so long to formulate my response, she asked, "Chemo?" "Not yet. First one's in 3 weeks when they start school." "What kind?" "It's called CMF." "Oh, they call that chemo light. It's easier to take than the other kind. My sister just finished her treatment last year. Let me know if you need anything at all. And of course, Isaac can stay here as much as he or you needs. My sister is perfectly fine now, you know." Isaac and I stayed a lot longer that day than we'd expected. By the way, Leah's a 34B. And now so am I.